Welcome, everybody. My name is Tracy Stitchishin, and I'm the Vice Chair with CAMA National. We're pleased to present the final session of CAMA's Next in Agri-Food webinar series. Today, we're talking about the importance of research and how to leverage the insights into your agri-marketing strategies. This series is continuing as an example of living our evolved mandate of representing Canada's entire food system from farm to fork. CAMA is made up of provincial chapters that work hard to provide the opportunities for members to connect with other agri-food marketers right across the country to grow their skills and their passion for marketing and communications. By being a CAMA member, you can reap these benefits. We'd like to thank those who have participated in each of the webinars in this series. We appreciate your support. And we're pleased to announce our upcoming CAMA events. CAMA will be hosting our second annual Level Up Conference, along with Best of CAMA and the CAMA Agri-Food Student Case Competition on November 6th to 7th in Calgary. Attendees at the CAMA Level Up Conference can expect to gain invaluable insights into the latest trends, strategies, and best practices in agri-food marketing. From understanding the art and science of persuasion in the digital age, to navigating the intricacies of marketing in both B2B and B2C landscapes. Participants will learn how to effectively reach and engage diverse audiences. Check out information on cama.org. Entries are now open for Best of CAMA. Feel free to start working on your entries, or for those who like to push the envelope, the entry deadline is September 19th. Let's take a listen to some of the speaker highlights from the 2023 Level Up Conference.
I think it's really important for us to hear speakers like Christian, Shane, Jed, and others be able to have a debate about what is working and what isn't, where the industry is going to, and understanding the pain points from the audience and the questions that they're going to be asking the speakers, just to understand where they are and what their thinking process is.
Networking is always a big plus at any of the CAMA events, and the stimulating speakers and hearing what's new and some issues that challenge our industry. It's always good to sharpen the saw, and I like to do that because, as one of the speakers mentioned this morning about status quo, if it's status quo, then you're actually losing ground. You're not advancing.
I was invited to speak on trends in digital marketing. So what we were trying to unpack was all the stuff that's going on in marketing, what's real, what's not real, what should people focus on, and what should people ignore.
I think the thing I enjoyed most today was the panel discussion in the afternoon. So all three keynotes got up there. They had a really interesting conversation. Susan was a really wonderful moderator. We got a lot of questions from the audience. And they really talked about, the future of marketing and trends and things we need to be watching for 2024 and onwards.
A big thank you as well to our returning sponsors, CCAN, Bayer, Federated Cooperatives, and Decision Farming by TELUS Agriculture have all joined as major sponsors. As you know, it's expensive to host a conference, and it takes industry support of CAMA to offer an event of this level. So please consider support either the conference, Best of CAMA, or the case competition. Contact Mary if you have any questions. And if you haven't already, follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn, see what's happening across the country in our industry. We'd like to thank our webinar series sponsors, CABEF and Top Crop Manager. Their support not only supports our webinar series, but also CAMA as a whole in implementing and expanding our offerings to members. We'd also like to acknowledge and recognize industry partners who have joined the CAMA National Sustaining Partner Program for a second year in a row. These inaugural partners are committed to our ongoing focus of CAMA that continues to be a dynamic, credible, and relevant organization for Canada's agri-food marketers and communicators. Our 4 committed partners are AdFarm, Bayer, McCann, and Real Agriculture. Thank you to these companies for your ongoing support. So I see Calissa's on. Just a few housekeeping items before we get over to her. Your questions today, please type them in the Q&A box on the control panel. We will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. The webinar is recorded and the link will be provided to participants by email within 24 hours of the webinar. We will also be sending all of you a follow-up survey to gather your input on the webinar today and to obtain feedback and suggestions for future CAMA events. I'll now turn it over to CAMA Alberta President, Calissa Reid with Veracauza to introduce today's presenter. Calissa?
Thanks, Tracy. Like Tracy mentioned, my name is Calissa Reid and I'm an account manager with Veracauza. I've been on the CAMA Alberta board for 4 years, and this is my first year as the chapter president. And I'm really excited to introduce our guest speakers today. Shaun is the founder of Real Agriculture and manages one of the leading industry digital sites for Canadian farmers and ranchers across the country. Justin is the owner of Agri-Studies. Justin brings over 20 years of experience working in the agricultural industry, teaching in both the academic and industry classroom. He has developed and delivered sales educational programs for numerous agribusiness organizations spanning all areas of the industry. A few years ago, Shaun and Justin came together to form Real Agri-Studies. Real Agri-Studies is about giving farmers the true opportunity to let their opinions be heard on a large range of subjects and issues impacting them. The Real Agri-Studies Insights panel provides real answers and concerns back to the innovators, researchers, and politicians, and it reflects the true sentiments farmers are feeling across Canada. Both Shaun and Justin have been longtime supporters of CAMA, and we're pleased to welcome them here today. And I will pass it over to Shaun and Justin.
Well, thank you very much, Calissa, for the nice introduction, and thank you to CAMA for asking Shaun and I to deliver this this important webinar. You know, we have been working together now for the past 5 years in the field of marketing research, which for both of us is, I would say, a bit of a side hustle, if you will. We both manage our own businesses separately, but a few years ago decided to come together and put our collective minds and efforts together and bring to the market now what we call Real Agri-Studies. And Shaun will talk about Real Agri-Studies in a moment, but I would like to lead off by saying that as somebody who teaches marketing, I am slightly ashamed, especially to be speaking to a group of sophisticated agri-marketers, that we couldn't have come up with a better name for our business than simply taking Shaun's company name and my company name and mashing them together. But it is what it is and it works, and so we've stuck with it. So here we are together as Real Agri-Studies. We have a number of things to get through today, so we're going to get started. And I'd like to start by posing a question to the group. And here is the question. And it's one that my father, Tom, who for many years taught marketing and has worked in the field of marketing research, he would often ask a class, and it kind of stuck with me. And it is this: what's worse than no information? Now, you may be sitting there and, posing an answer to this question. Well, here it is. It's bad information. And so as people who are shepherding our clients in the industry through this rather complicated maze of conducting market research, what we'd like to do today is just share with you some highlights, some key observations that we've made, and also talk to you about what goes into doing a market research study, recognizing that not all of you are necessarily going to go out and do surveys tomorrow, but you may be on the other end of reviewing survey work that has been done to help inform some of your marketing strategies, either for yourself or on behalf of your clients. And so what we're going to address are the following. We're going to look at why research matters. It's really, I mean, it's an investment, and we got to make sure that the investment is going to pay off. We're going to look at some considerations that we must think about when it comes to doing market research. And then we're going to explore some different types of market research and different applications of that research, and then look at some practical examples that we can share with you from some of the work that we have done that relates to the different types of research that can be conducted to help guide and inform agri-marketing strategies. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shaun to share some of his thoughts with you as to why market research matters.
Hey, great to be here with everybody. And Justin and I, it says something about CAMA, and one of the, I guess the benefits of going to the Best of CAMA event that Tracy was talking about, is actually that's where Justin and I first met. And like all good ideas, they are founded over a pint of beer. And it was actually at a Best of CAMA meeting where that first conversation between the two of us did transpire. So, one of the things that dealing with a lot of different clients in Canada, there's a bit of a gap, and this is we really have wanted to help to fill this gap when it does come to providing some of that good information, which is the opposite of the bad information that Justin was talking about. What I see constantly is the farmers' opinion, thoughts, behaviors, attitudes, beliefs are constantly hijacked. Farmers are a very important component of the value chain, and what they think matters, and that's why everybody hijacks how they feel. And and what I mean by that is saying, well, I think farmers believe this, farmers believe that, and a lot of times that is founded based on just a few anecdotal conversations. And so we've all been to a meeting. Maybe we're on we're in a corporate boardroom, or we're on an association board of directors, and somebody comes to the meeting and says, I've talked to a few farmers about this, and here's what they believe. And then we extrapolate and make that about the entire industry. And that's obviously not statistically significant, and can also, that is that bad information that Justin was talking about. The other thing specific to Canada is that in Canada, we've become, because of the lack of market research that is out there when it comes to understanding how farmers feel and behave, we tend to extrapolate US data. And this can work in many different situations because there's a lot of US data out there. The US is a lot bigger market than Canada. But there's a lot of topics where that extrapolation, it doesn't necessarily hold. And one example that we have found is, for example, biofuel policy. If you take opinions on biofuels from the Midwest, that's going to be very, very different in opinion than if you were to look at Eastern Canada, and for sure in Western Canada. And in Canada, we become very, very complacent with some of this extrapolation. So that was kind of the trigger point for Justin and I to form this initiative of Real Agri-Studies and try to provide more insight to people like yourselves, CAMA members, in terms of getting that information from the farmer to the industry.
So over the past number of years, now 5 years, we have worked on a number of projects, and it all began in 2020 with something that we called Farm Vision. Farm Vision was a redux of a project that I got to work on in 2010 called the Large Commercial Producer Study, which was a redux of a 1995 study that my dad did at the University of Guelph of the same name. And so that instituted the whole thing. And then from there, Shaun, we worked on a number of different projects, and probably the most significant of those would be the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index, which we will talk about here in a moment. Shaun, is there anything else that you want to mention with respect to the different types of projects that we've done?
No, I think we should get into some of the content. I just want to say that, we have really, across all the different research that we have done, it's as much as it's important to, everybody kind of leans to the, like, did you find something that you didn't expect? But a lot of times too, from a marketing standpoint, it's confirming what some of our assumptions were that we're talking about, especially when it comes to how farmers think about things. So I think a lot of times people think about some of these issues, like say around farm transition or how farmers feel about interest rates and inflation, just to pick on two, it's nice to have those ahas, but it's also important to do some confirming of things that we had assumed initially.
Yeah. One thing I will say about the projects we've done is that they're very timely in nature. It's a lot of these, you take a look at the diesel pricing study that we did back in 2022. That was at a time when diesel prices started to skyrocket, and we were able to turn around results very quickly to show the industry, here's how farmers are reacting and responding and are impacted by this. And some projects you see, and through no fault of anybody in particular, it sometimes takes 6 months for the information to come back. And by that point, the information may not be as relevant as it was at the time the issue was happening in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that's, a lot of times we hear from people, and some of them, maybe are listening to this webinar. You hear, farmers don't like surveys. They just don't like them. Farmers are surveyed to death. We have proven if you ask farmers about issues they really care about and issues that actually impact their farming operations, and you ask them questions that they're passionate about, they do respond to surveys. As we've seen, anywhere from 400 to 1,000 people answering a survey within 72 hours. And so I think that's an important piece of for you to take away.
So some of you do research, some of you receive research. I want to just take a few moments here and talk about some of the principles of doing market research. So if you are contemplating doing it, you have sort of the right frame of mind going into it. And because marketing research really is about asking questions, the most important question that needs to be asked really is the one you need to ask yourself. And that is, what are you looking to accomplish? Anytime we're sitting down with anybody who is looking to do market research, this is always the first question that we ask. What are your objectives? Because this really dictates everything else that you're looking to do. So, we would start with what information are you looking to collect? Is it attitudes? Is it behaviors? Is it reaction to certain concepts? How are you going to use this information? Is it going to be used to align a value proposition, design a communication strategy, bring a new product to market, or maybe to establish a price point? What level of accuracy are you willing to accept? This is a very important question. And in a moment, I'm going to show you a table that gives you an idea of how many people you actually need to hear from in order to get meaningful results. But that's going to then dictate the methodology that you might employ. And of course, there are many different ways to conduct market research. There's qualitative, where you have conversations with people to get a sense as to their feelings, their top of mind responses, lots of open-ended questions, usually done in person or telephone. But then there's quantitative, where you do surveys, online, written, telephone, where you try to measure things. And that's where you will often need a little bit more precision and accuracy in the type of information you're collecting. We'll always challenge people on who do you want to hear from. Often people want to hear from their customers, and I think that's great. I think there's lots of application for us to learn more about our customers, or in some of your cases, your clients' customers. But what about non-customers? These are the people maybe we're trying to influence, or lapsed customers, identifying why they're lapsed and what might bring them back. A lot of the work that we do starts with the channel. So many of the products and services sold in agriculture are sold through a distribution channel. Maybe we don't need to go right to farmers. Maybe we need to talk to dealers or retailers to get a better understanding of how they see things. Lots of good insights can come from that. And then, of course, influencers in the market, which could be anybody from academics or agronomic consultants or nutritionists or whatever the case might be. In Canada, one of the biggest obstacles we face is obtaining contacts. And I think you all probably know this better than anybody. So with all the privacy restrictions in place, even us being able to use somebody else's database comes with pretty much signing your firstborn away, which is a pretty heavy incentive to not misrepresent that information. Maybe you are in a position where you can access contacts from somebody else's database, albeit in Canada, that's really difficult to do. We're very lucky, Shaun and I, that we spent the last 5 years building a panel. So we've now got 3,500 farmers that we can turn to pretty much tomorrow if we wanted to, and poll them on a number of issues that would be of interest to the industry or to the people answering the questions. Do you want to be identified as a sponsor? Sometimes the information we're looking to collect, like awareness, for instance, if I am doing a project for Shaun at Real Agriculture on awareness of different ag media sources, and I say, hey, I'm doing this project on behalf of Real Agriculture. Have you heard of Real Agriculture? I sort of bias the results right out of the gate because I've just made people aware of Real Agriculture. Whereas I go to the market as Agri-Studies, my company, I say, I'm doing a study on ag media consumption. Have you heard of Real Agriculture? I haven't biased it by introducing that, hey, I'm doing this on behalf of somebody. So that often is a very tedious discussion to navigate, but it's one that needs to be had. In agriculture, timing matters a lot. As you know, the production cycle influences people's availability, but we've almost found that in some cases, the tables have turned completely, where it used to be the winter was a great time to do this. Well, now you have a hard time catching people because they're in Phoenix. Now maybe you can actually catch them in April or May because they're sitting in a tractor with auto steer and they can actually do a survey while they're out in the field. But making sure that you've got enough time, and maybe you're not competing with what's going on in the field, but you definitely are competing with what's going on in the mind. And so we got to make sure that we are approaching people at a time when they're in a position to answer questions with some degree of accuracy and purpose. Of course, we're always asked about budget, and all I'll say to this is that different types of projects require different levels of budgets. Some can be done surprisingly efficiently and inexpensively. Others might require more budgetary resources, but we always respect people's budgets and, again, try to deliver the best information we can given the constraints that are in place. But we always ask this question too: are there other more cost-effective ways to get the information? There's a lot of research that has been done that's available either to purchase or that may be available for free through industry associations, government, universities, or NGOs, or whatever the case might be. When it really comes down, though, to the nitty-gritty, this is probably the most important discussion to be had, and that is, what level of accuracy are you willing to accept, and how many people do we need to talk to? This is a traditional statistical table. You can find this anywhere on the internet, but it tells us an awful lot. A couple things we always will illustrate here is, first of all, how big is the population, the universe? So in Canada, with over 120,000 farms, we have that over 10,000 member population. Well, if we want a degree of accuracy plus or minus 5%, 400 is the magic number. Now, it doesn't seem like an awful lot given the fact that you've got 100,000 farmers, but traditionally speaking, according to the laws of statistics, if you've got 400, you can interpret the results within that degree of accuracy of plus or minus 5%. But that also then provides a basis for discussion. Like, do you need plus or minus 5%? In some cases, you might need more. In some cases, you might be willing to tolerate plus or minus 10%, in which case 100 is okay. So you can see the variations here that exist. In any event, the basis for analysis is and always will be 30. And it's really interesting when you actually take a look at this. So and what I mean by the 30 is, if you want to now do some subdivision of your data and look at one group relative to another, you got to have 30 in each group to draw a meaningful conclusion. So that does limit the level and depth of analysis you can do, but it's really interesting when you watch survey results come in. Once you hit the 30 mark, on aggregate, rarely do the results change a whole lot. And so, I look at the laws of statistics and I think, you know what, whoever figured this out knew what they were doing. And by the way, it wasn't me. It was somebody a lot smarter than me many, many years ago. So those are some of the discussions that we have, and I guess they constitute some of the high-level principles of market research. Now, I share that with you because I want to make sure that everybody on the call has a basic understanding here. So now, as we dive into some of the applications of market research, you might have a grasp on the background to which we come at some of these projects. So what we're going to do for the balance of our time together is illustrate some examples of different ways research can be used to help inform agri-marketing strategy, and then rely on some real-life case studies that are either driven from some of the syndicated work that Shaun and I have done, where we're going to show you some real results, and focus less on the results, but why the results matter and how they've been used. And then in some cases, some work that we've done for some clients where we have been given full permission to use these as examples. So here are some of the applications we're going to look at. We're going to look at characteristics of customers or the marketplace, awareness and perception of products and brands, attitudes and behaviors of buyers, segmentation, and then what is probably the most technical of applications that we're going to look at, estimating demand and establishing a price. If any of you have ever had to do sales forecasting, you will know that this is not an easy task. It can be made simpler with good, effective market research at your disposal. So let's start with characteristics of the market. Shaun, why don't you walk people through? This is one of the characteristics that we discovered in one of the studies that we did on farmer skill development.
Yeah, so a lot of times when we are asking questions related to a specific issue, in later on surveys, that former issue-based question can turn into a demographic. And a lot of times we'll hear people in the marketplace talking about on-farm versus off-farm income. And so we had done this survey, and we found that 56% of the people that answered this are, said, hey, I have off-farm income to some sort of significance. I go to the next one, Justin. What's interesting is when you that's fine, so 56%, whatever, but when you overlay that in terms of farm size by revenue, you can start to pick up some patterns, and we see here, the smaller the farm from a revenue standpoint, the more likely you are to have off-farm income. When a company is looking at this, that can give them some sort of insight, depending on what kind of product or service that they are using, to target those kinds of individuals. So we routinely see where the data is, you can look at it just on like a yes no or kind of basis like we did in this case, but it's when you dive into the demographics is when you really start to understand what those percentages really mean and how the market does break down. This is by age. We see the same thing. The younger you are, the higher the probability is that you have off-farm income. Does that describe it pretty good, Justin?
Yep, I think you did a great job. And you take something like this, off-farm income, that now becomes in itself its own demographic variable that we can look at. Well, how do people answer certain questions relative to whether they have off-farm income or even the source of that off-farm income? So, and we continue to look at this and these sorts of things in each and every study that we do and attempt to kind of, build a better profile of today's farmer.
Well, and think about it from a government perspective and trying to build, programming around, farm management programs or business resource management. From a sales perspective, I think there's a lot of ways that you can attack the market as a marketer, knowing some of that information.
Another application of research that we're often asked about is where people want to know more about how the market perceives them. And I would imagine for those of you in the communication side of things, you are often asked this question too, related to awareness and perceptions. I can't really share with you a specific example here of a piece of work we've done on this because it's very proprietary in nature. You can imagine, a client might not necessarily want this to be shared, but when we're doing this type of work, and if you're considering doing this type of work, this is how we do it. So recognizing that, understanding the level of awareness that your company or brand or product might have in the marketplace. How we approach this is we go to the market and we ask them, okay, in a certain space, let's say it's varieties of soybean seeds. We ask, name all the brands of soybean seed companies that you've heard of, and we capture that. And that's now what constitutes what we call unaided awareness. We didn't have to remind people of any names. We just simply asked them and they answered top of mind. And not only do we record that name that they said, but we record the order that they mention those names in. Because I do think that there's some merit to what name is mentioned first. We say tip of tongue is tip of mind. And there's value in that. But then we'll go and we'll ask some follow-up questions. So for the brands that weren't mentioned, but we still want to measure, we will say, well, have you heard of X, Y, or Z? And then we'll check that box. And if the respondent says yes, then we put that into a category. We say aided awareness. And so this now gives us insight into the degree to which the market may be aware, aided or unaided, or overall awareness of a certain product or brand. It's also a great opportunity to start looking at some positioning factors. And so it's one thing to know if somebody is aware that you exist. It's another what they think or feel about you, or if they know anything about you. And so simply we'll ask a question like, when I say brand X, what comes to mind? And we record those thoughts, again, in order of mention. And what that allows us to do is to look at the proportion of people that might say, well, brand X is associated with service or quality or research and development or a solid sales team. And then we can look at those positioning factors relative to competitors in the factors that they are positioned on. And sometimes what we learn is the positioning is exactly what people want it to be. In other cases, we find that it's not. And then that might suggest that there's either some reconciliation that needs to be done, or there is a revision to the strategy that needs to be made.
The other thing about that too is not just comparing to others in the marketplace, but also, over a number of years doing that same kind of work, comparing to your own benchmark, right? So if being known for focus on sustainability is one of the company's key KPIs, it allows you over a number of years to benchmark how your customers feel about you and sustainability over a period of time.
Awareness and perceptions of certain products or brands is one thing, but then there's looking at the human being who sits at that kitchen table making a decision to buy those products. We spend a lot of time really trying to understand what's going in the mind of the customer, either when it comes to making decisions around certain products or just overall in terms of how they manage their farm business. And probably the greatest attempt that we have made at this is in our benchmark study, which we call the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index. Shaun, maybe you could walk people through what we've been doing with the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index.
Yeah, over that first pint of beer, this was something that Justin and I definitely discussed at that time in terms of something we wanted to do. So working in parallel or mirroring off of what the Purdue and what Purdue does with their Purdue CME Ag Barometer in the U.S., we've asked similar questions to them. So we do have a contrast to compare to how, in terms of how Canadian farmers feel about certain topics relative to their American peers, which I think is valuable information, especially for something like agri-marketers that are working on both sides of the border. The 100 is neutral. The scale goes from obviously 0 to 200. And so we're asking a bunch of questions here that are really, really important to the farmer that also give some insight into their current mindset. And we're surveying on a quarterly basis here, okay? So the first bank of data that Justin shared is their current farm financial performance. How do I feel about is my farm better off, same as, or worse off than 12 months ago? Okay. And then we're also asking about future farm financial performance. Do I expect my farm financial performance to be better, same, or worse 12 months from now than it is today? And we can see there's some trends that develop. Just to give you a bit of a quick example, we've seen that current farm financial performance is always better than future farm financial performance, but the two numbers have been converging on each other until they kind of rolled over together in January of 24. We can also see, if you look at on the far right side, we're asking about state of mental health, which has been relatively stable. It is under 100, the neutral line, but this is people comparing how is my mental health today versus 12 months ago, better off, same as, or worse off. These are all personal questions, but these are in financial in nature, social science in nature, as well as things like my confidence in making farm investments. How do I feel about my ability to market my crops or my livestock? Or even what's my outlook in terms of, or is the market going up or going down? And so, hosting a radio show on a daily basis, I'll hear from the audience, I think you're misreading. Like, why are you so negative? Farmers aren't negative; they're optimistic. And having this backup of this data allows us to say, well, you may feel that way, but actually, quite frankly, farmers are really negative about the current environment. And here's some of our findings. So it's really, I think it's nice to have that that data, that quantitative information in the backdrop that really has not been available to the Canadian marketplace in the past.
What Shaun just walked you through is an example of secondary information. It's out there, it's available to the industry to look at and decipher and use in their strategies. But there might be more practical applications for specific decisions that you need to make. And so I want to give you an example of how attitudes can be used to help identify certain trends that might exist with respect to particular issues that might be of interest to you. So a little while ago, we did a study on farmer skill development. We wanted to better understand farmers' attitudes towards professional development, where they were focusing their efforts in terms of topics and how they received content. And one of the ways that we measured this was by leveraging what we call attitude statements. And attitude statements are great because they're easy to answer. And they usually present a rather one-sided look at something and then ask people to the degree to which they agree or disagree. And so we're not going to go through these in much detail, but here's an example. Learning and development is a priority for me in the farm. I feel developing skills of others on the farm is important. You can see that the results show that there's rather high levels of agreement to a question like this. At the bottom, I will only participate in learning and development programs where the cost of the training is subsidized by another party. There's a little more disagreement to that statement. And so this kind of tells you what side of the fence people are sitting on when it comes to some of the issues that may be important to them or to you. What the attitude statement then allows us to do is to look at the relative agreement to each other. So here you can see by calculating means, we're able to look at, well, some things have overall higher levels of agreement, some things have lower levels of agreement, which on their own don't really share much with us. But when you take these and overlay them on top of certain demographics or other characteristics, it allows us to very easily visualize trends. So in this case, looking at these top two, the learning and development is a priority. You can see that while it may be marginal, the trend shows that there's stronger agreement to these statements as farm size increases. And so if targeting certain groups based on their attitudes is something that you're looking at doing, then you can leverage these attitude statements on their own, or you can look at them as part of a segmentation strategy, which we'll look at here in a little bit.
Yeah, and if you're an organization that's building learning and development programs, having access to, okay, what kind of content is important to people, what is the way that each of those demographics wants to receive that information, and what kind of information do they want to learn more about in the future, you're actually able to design programming more suited to some of the market segments that you're pursuing.
And one of the great examples of that is a project that we worked on, which was designed to measure farmers' preferences. So there's attitudes, which is how I think, but then there's preferences and behaviors, which now reflect what I do, right? And it's that call to action that we're looking for. In this case study, and Shaun, I'll let you speak to this, we did on behalf of a client in the crop input space who was looking to learn a little bit more about how farmers were managing weed resistance, which of course is a very important topic in agriculture today.
Yeah, they were launching a new product that was, from a fall application standpoint, really trying to talk about, they wanted to communicate a message around not only tank mixing, but also herbicide layering. And some of the things that we looked at was just general awareness of weed resistance, what weeds were they having trouble with, which weeds actually were they facing resistance with, and what were they actually doing about it, and of course crossing all the different demographics to get a better understanding. Do larger farms have a better understanding or a better, a more complex strategy than smaller farms, or vice versa? And it helped them build their launch campaign, which included a lot of our data in panel discussions with customers at a live customer event, and things like that. So they not only use the information at the front end to build their campaign and the messaging, but then they carried it through into the campaign in terms of furthering the education and learning from a learning and development standpoint with those growers.
Another study that we did, and this was a broad industry study, a different target market than what we would normally be dealing with, but looking at measuring farmers' now preferences and level of satisfaction when it came to their experiences with producer organizations. This one was really cool because what we did, and this is an interesting way to get insights from people, we presented a number of different I guess, factors or activities that a producer organization might engage in. And then we ask farmers to rate the relative importance of those things. So the organization represents my interest, or they have a positive relationship with government. And that's one thing, right? To be able to look at what's important. And it's really easy for somebody to say, yeah, that's important to me. But then we ask the degree to which they felt producer organizations were satisfying those different factors. And what that produced was a gap. And so gap analysis can be really, really effective in now pinpointing where we need to be focusing attention. And so as you can see from this chart, some of these bars, which are all negative, right? So that means there's a gap. The bigger the bar suggests how big the gap is relative to another, and therefore maybe where these groups might want to focus a little bit more of their time, energy, and resources. Let's see. Now, looking at a little more complex side of things, many of you, I would imagine, engage in some degree of segmentation. And just as a quick reminder of what segmentation is, it is identifying different groups within a market based on similarities within the groups and differences that exist between the groups. Now, I've done a lot of work on segmentation in my career, and it's really interesting to hear how people think about it. Sometimes people think about it based on product lines, and product lines are not segments, they're product lines. Segments are groups of customers or prospects. And often we will look at segmentation based on pre-existing factors that exist in the market, and that's what we call a priori segmentation. So for example, how often do you talk about large farmers or smaller farmers or older farmers or younger farmers? We know that those segments exist. It's now a matter of placing people into those segments and identifying them as being part of that segment. The role of market research then is for us to establish the size of those segments. So are there more older farmers or younger farmers? What is our customer base? How is it represented in this case? And that can be a very effective way to do things. But where you see the real power in market research is in what we call cluster-based segmentation, where we might go into an exercise not even knowing that a segment exists and using research to identify a segment, and then overlaying that on top of other factors to start developing profiles. And so in clustering, you might need, this is a very simple example, you might measure how people rate the relative importance of two factors, price and service. And you can see that there's some people that give price really high marks, and there's some people that get service really high marks. Well, what these do is these illustrate clusters, and these clusters now allow us to identify segments which we can treat differently based on what we have observed those differences to be. I want to share with you an example that I can share on cluster-based segmentation. And I'm sure you have heard of and maybe even used the concept of adoption profiling in some of the work that you do. But in our farm vision study, we use some of the questions, attitude statements, to identify clusters that would now allow us to observe the different groups in the market identified as being innovators, early adopters, majority, and laggard. And so using the answers to the attitude statements, like I'm one of the first to try new products, implementing new production technologies in my future, etc., using a little very simple algorithm we put together, we could then identify each contact and each member of the sample as being one of the 5 adoption categories, which then allowed us to produce a profile of who the innovator is, who the early adopter is, who the laggard is, etc. Now, this is a fairly common approach, and it's interesting to look at this because those adoption profiles pretty much mimic any other study that has been done. But here's one where we took advantage of some information that we had from our farmer skill development survey to identify clustered segments based on what we call business acumen. And so here we looked at how people had approached learning and development and the types of learning and development activities they have engaged in. And through that, identified that there were 3 different segments. There was a group that we called the CEO, a group that we called the aspiring CEO, and then a group that we called the general manager. So now you've got these 3 different segments, which are uniquely different with respect to how they engage in learning development and the topics. Well, that's not the only thing that they're different in. So from there, what we could do is we could take that segment now and create a profile based on their demographics, their participation in learning activities, their attitudes, and also their preferences when it came to how they consumed content. And I'm, again, not getting into detail here, but what this chart shows is that each segment is uniquely different, which now allows an organization in this space to look at, well, what might we want to do in order to move the aspiring CEO to the CEO through learning and development offerings, how we communicate with them, etc.
It also gives us, if you just go back 1 second, Justin, it also gives us insight if we take these kind of profiles and we cross-reference them with the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index findings, and then we can know the current or say future farm financial performance of the CEO versus the general manager, which also provides that further depth of insight in terms of how the farmer's thinking.
Yeah. And we did a report on that, and there was actually some pretty cool stuff that came from that particular finding. Okay, so we're going to be up against the clock here. So in respecting your time, I'm going to just jump to this last area and go through it. So far we've looked at characteristics, awareness, attitudes, behaviors, and then, of course, segmentation, which now gets a little bit more actionable, right? Because a lot of that other stuff we looked at can be used in the development of segments, which can now lend themselves to the strategies that you are developing and executing. Probably the most complex of anything we're going to talk about here, but maybe one of the most important, is leveraging market insights to measure demand. I will often say that sales forecasting is a guess at best, but honestly, if we can leverage at least some good information to help us, given the stakes that are at play here, it's probably worth making that investment and at least exploring what can be done to help refine demand estimation and also establish price points, which as you know, is a very, very complex and important decision that needs to be made. So to finish this off, I'm going to walk you through a short case study here for a client that we worked with in the ag tech space. And I'm going to sort of set up the situation for you so you understand the context in which I'm presenting this information. So the client wanted to test demand for a new version of an older product that they were modifying. So their traditional, very well-established desktop software program had been used in the marketplace for many years, but the time had come for them to change it and migrate it to now cloud-based computing platform. And there's a lot of risks in doing this, of course. There's the risk of drop-off, that people just say, I'm not going to do it at all, and I'm going to stop using it, I'm going to switch to something else. But then there's also factors related to how do we shepherd people through this process and make sure that we're doing everything that we can to ensure a smooth transition. So the assignment was to test demand. And not only test demand, but test demand at different price points, because it also was an opportunity for the client to reevaluate how they priced it. So going from a one-time fee for a CD-ROM to now a monthly subscription fee. So what we did is we did a concept test. We presented the market with a concept which explained what the new product looked like, and we asked the likelihood of trial. Would you use it? Definitely would, probably would not, or definitely would not. And so as you can see on the right-hand side, we got an aggregate number there showing what the overall uptake might look like. But one of the wrinkles that we threw into this is that we divided the group into 3 mutually exclusive groups of the sample, and we asked them the same question, but at 3 different price points. Would you try it at $20 a month to one group, $40 a month to another group, and then the other price point that was up for consideration significantly higher, but $100 a month? Okay, so you can see here we're measuring uptake at different price points. Well, the results came back showing that demand looked significantly different, as you would expect at the different price points. So the higher the price, the lower the demand, which, I'm not certain about a whole lot of things in my life, but one I am certain of is the more you charge for something, the less you're going to sell. The question, though, that's not the question. The question is, are you better off selling more for less or less for more? So taking this insight, what we were able to do then is we were able to estimate demand. Now, ignore the numbers. The numbers, these are the real numbers, by the way. But you can see, and I don't know if my cursor is showing here, but you can see how demand really drops off at that $100 price point. Okay, well, that's one piece of information, but there's more we need to know here, because the price times quantity equals revenue. And that's really the important number, right? Is how much are we going to make? So we use this as an opportunity to test elasticity of demand. Now, I'm not going to scare you here. I'm not taking you back to like first year economics, but elasticity of demand is a very, very important theory for us to look at. And here we looked at elasticity between the price points of 20 and 40, and then 40 and 100. And what we found is that the elasticity between 20 and 40 was very inelastic, meaning demand didn't stretch. So you'd be much better off charging 40 than you would 20. You're not going to sell that much more at 20, not enough to compensate for the revenue. But then when you look at between 40 and 100, it was much less inelastic, means demand, it's still inelastic, but it's stretched a little bit more. Well, here was the consequence and the result. Is that when you took a look at their customer base, which was about 3,000 current users, we were able to estimate what revenue would look like at the 3 different price points. We also asked the question, the speed of transition. Would you do it in the first year, the second year, or the third year? And now when we overlay that on top of it, we were able to produce an estimation, in this case at $40 a month, which was the number that was decided on because it maximized both number of users, which was an important criteria, with revenue. Okay, so if $100 was higher revenue, but much less users, okay, we were able to see what the 3-year annual revenue forecast and demand forecast would look like, and then the total. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because there is absolutely no way we could have come up with this without doing the research. So research really, really pays for itself in this regard. But to that point, to show the accuracy of this, now the 3-year mark has passed, and I was talking with the client not too long ago. We've actually used this as a case study now in some of the marketing classes we teach. When you reflect back on the demand uptake at $40 and also the revenue, demand ended up being, at the end of 3 years, $2,500. Okay, so pretty darn close considering what we were looking at. And revenue was about $1.5 million. So I would say that all things considered, that was pretty accurate when it came to the nature of the decision that needed to be made and the implications of getting it wrong. So With that, that's all we have for you. There's a lot there, I know. We're happy to entertain any questions that might have come from the group, and of course afterwards, if anybody has any specific questions on research applications, we would be more than happy to have that discussion. So, Tracy, are we turning it back over to you?
You bet. Thank you so much. So insightful. We just have a few minutes left before we wrap up, and we have one question that came through. So this is a two-part question. With the on-farm authority transitioning to next generation farmers well underway, how can agri-marketers best get the opinions of these new decision makers? And then the second one is get the other on-farm decision makers' opinions around the kitchen table, knowing that the primary contact may not be making all the decisions anymore.
Well, on the first one, speak to our insights panel, is that, that's one of the sub demo questions that we have looked at is, where are you in the generational profile on the farm? In terms of, if you are a multi-generational farm, are you the youngest, the middle, or the oldest generation? Which then we can look at a cross section of all the different issues that we have asked about, whether that's the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index, that's how you feel about farm succession or interest rates or whatever have you. We can actually then look at how each of those generations on the farm feel about different topics, and then do that compare and contrast. Is that good, Justin?
Yeah, and if we're doing a qualitative study where we're phoning people, you can vet the respondent. You can ask to speak to somebody specifically. You got to be tactful about how you do that, because you never want to imply somebody isn't important if they're not the decision maker. But we always need to make sure that we're talking to the right person. In 2016, we did a study with my colleagues at Purdue University where we actually talked to two generations on the same farm. And that was a really interesting, it was separate interviews, but we did that to see how they align or don't align on certain subjects. So there are ways to do it. And great question, because that issue is a very timely and important issue in agri-marketing today. And we're seeing that transition happen, and it is ongoing, and it's a moving target.
Well, and for example, in the Farm Vision study we did in 2020, we also were able to look at who's making those decisions based on generation. So for example, the seed purchasing decision is one of the earliest things to be handed off to the younger generation, while finance and accounting discussions are the last to be moved on to that next generation. Just as an example of some of the profiling that we've done.
Great. Probably have time for one more question here. When doing a study on price elasticity, how can one be sure that customers are not showing bias with a lower price point?
Okay. Well, okay. So I think I understand the question. So hopefully my answer reflects the right intention here. I want to highlight that when we did that elasticity study, we didn't say, would you buy it at 20? And then ask that same person, okay, now would you buy it 40 or would you buy it at 100? We give them one price point, but we divide the sample up into groups. So this group got 20, that group got 40, this other group got 100. So for all they know, there's only one price point, and so we're measuring that demand. Otherwise, it becomes an auction. And that's bad information. So that's why we pay very particular attention to methodology when we do that type of stuff. And that's an example, by the way, of where precision matters. Like, if you don't talk to enough people there and you get not enough results to draw conclusions, then you could be going down a pathway that's very difficult to come back from. I hope that answers the question.
Great. Thanks, Justin. And Shaun, I'm going to hand it back to Calissa to close us off for today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tracy, and Shaun and Justin. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us all. In lieu of a speaker gift today, we will be making a donation to the Canadian Agribusiness Education Foundation in your name. CABIF is a charity that provides scholarships to Canadian students who are pursuing an agricultural post-secondary education. Thanks again to our webinar series sponsors, CABIF and Top Crop Manager. And thanks to everyone for participating today and for supporting CAMA. If you'd like to learn more about CAMA, please go to our website at cama.org. And thank you for the support today. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.